Welcome back to Arise News Hour. I'm Charles Eniagulu in Abuja. Now to the U.S., where Donald Trump has picked Pam Bondi as Attorney General. The news of Miss Bondi's nomination came about 6 hours after Matt Gaetz said he would not seek the high-profile cabinet post of Attorney General following days of debate over whether to release a congressional report on sexual misconduct allegations against him. Announcing his withdrawal, Mr. Gaetz said the controversy over his potential nomination was unfairly becoming a distraction to the work of the incoming Trump administration. Well, staying in America, the Democratic Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania has conceded the final outstanding race for the U.S. Senate to his Republican opponent, Dave McCormick, more than 2 weeks after the election. In a video posted on X, Mr. Casey said it had been the honor of his lifetime to have served in the role. With this result, Donald Trump's Republican Party widens its majority in the next Senate, holding 53 out of 100 seats.
First count of ballots is completed. Pennsylvanians can move forward with the knowledge that their voices were heard, whether their vote was the first to be counted or the last. This race was one of the closest in our Commonwealth's history, decided by less than a quarter of a point. I'm grateful to the thousands of people who worked to make sure that every eligible vote cast could be counted, including election officials in all 67 counties. When a Pennsylvanian takes the time to cast a legal vote, often waiting in long lines and taking time away from their work and family, they deserve to know that their vote will count. That's democracy. I'm proud of the work we've done since Election Day to enfranchise voters across the state, no matter whom they voted for, and to ensure that the democratic process could unfold.
Well, for more on all the political developments coming out of America, I'm joined now on the line from Memphis, Tennessee, by the U.S.-based international human rights lawyer and pro-democracy advocate Emmanuel Ogebe. Thank you very much, Emmanuel, for joining us. So what do you think might have forced Matt Gaetz to step down? Did it become apparent that he was not going to get the confirmation votes in Congress to push him through?
Well, yeah, Charles, like you rightly summarized, when we spoke last week, it was really an uphill task. Would there be enough U.S. Republicans who were willing to die on the heel of Matt Gaetz? And the thing about him is he was very divisive, not just in the U.S. public, but even within his own party. And I guess this just shows us the limits on which, loyalty to an individual can go. Now, let's be very clear. The issues surrounding Gaetz were deeply personal. We have a situation where Trump has appointed a lawyer to be the secretary for Health and Human Services. That's unheard of. Anywhere in the world, you have a doctor, a medical professional, head Health and Human Services. Under Bush, 20 years ago, the deputy Secretary for Health and Human Services was a lawyer, but the secretary was a doctor. And so you have something like RFK, a lawyer, being head of Health and Human Services, and nobody is talking about his personal moral character. But with Gaetz, it was completely different because, the reports against him were so bad that it was disturbing. The same DOJ had investigated him. In fact, there were allegations of him having, paid money, for sex and then child trafficking and all of that kind of nonsense. Now, let's be very clear. In the past, we have had an attorney general nominee who stepped down because there was an allegation that they hired undocumented workers, okay? That is a far cry from saying that an attorney general nominee paid multiple times for sex or had sex with an underage child and was investigated by the Department of Justice and by the Congress. And so I have to say Gaetz imploded under the weight of his own lack of character. And I think that this is actually a huge lesson for President Trump. It's a reality check that he doesn't have the mandate he thinks that he has.
Right, and of course, Mr. Trump has now picked the former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi to replace Matt Gaetz and lead the Justice Department. What can you tell us about Miss Bondi? I understand she's a staunch supporter of Donald Trump, but doesn't have lots of personal baggage and is seen as someone who can be confirmed.
Well, let me say that, the definition of scandal in Washington has always been, a dead girl or a live boy. And what you can tell from that saying is that scandal is usually associated with men. Men are the ones who have, this sort of predilections that can get them into trouble. So Trump did a very smooth 180-degree turn in which he decided to go for someone who would most likely have less garbage, sexual garbage, like Gaetz had. And let me point something out here. Now, the thing about Gaetz is that he had similar, baggage to what Trump himself had, paying women for sex. Remember that Trump's own convictions were related to hush money payments he made to sex workers for sex he had with them. So clearly, Trump had in mind somebody who had similar legal issues and problems with him, like the DOJ, who would go in, and to use an expression you used last week effectively, as a wrecking ball to wreck the Department of Justice. In fact, I'll go a step further to say all of the folks that Trump is nominating seem to be his demolition crew. A crew that is coming out to take down the U.S. government, and rebuild it in his own image. So in that sense, Pam is also a Trump loyalist. She doesn't have, the qualifications that you would expect. I mean, Kamala Harris, for example, is still way more qualified than her to be Attorney General of the Department of Justice. But for now, it's a safer bet for Trump. One quick illustration I do want to make is you will remember that last year, President Tinubu nominated Bagudu. Many people were concerned because of his ongoing litigations in DC, over $200 million in Abacha loot. But Tinubu gave strict orders to the senators that no one should oppose Bagudu's nomination. But here's something that Tinubu did that was interesting. When El-Rufai went, for confirmation, he simply did not throw his political power or his political mileage or capital behind him. And that was how El-Rufai lost out. Now, Trump similarly seems to have done something of that nature in the sense that he decided, you know what, maybe I shouldn't wait till confirmation and risk losing this nominee. And I think it's more likely than not that he asked Gaetz to fall on his own sword. I don't think Gaetz was ready to do that on his own. This is somebody who defended an insurrection against the same Congress that he served in. So someone that loyal to Trump would have gone to the gates of hell, riding that nomination pony. But I think Trump asked him to step down. And I think that's why we saw Pam Bondi's nomination coming out barely 6 hours after he stepped down. They were ready to move on.
I mean, we'll have to see what happens, whether Mr. Trump can get all of his nominees through, because, you've still got controversies surrounding some of the other nominees, including the likes of Robert Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, and even Peter Hegseth. But just explain to us a bit more about the role of Attorney General. We're running out of time, so we need to keep this fairly brief. Explain to us a bit more about the role of Attorney General. It's obviously a very important role in itself, but particularly important for Donald Trump. What's your sense of his thinking about how he wants his Attorney General to act over the span of his administration? There, seems to be these persistent rumors that he wants the Department of Justice almost to be like his personal law firm to protect him and also to go against his opponents.
Yeah, so now here's what's interesting. The role of Attorney General is one of the few in the world that is constitutionally reserved for the legal profession. So you don't see any constitution in the world where the role of Secretary for Health is earmarked for doctors. But for Attorney General, that is basically what you see everywhere. And that's how important it is, the chief law officer of the nation. Now, you're right. Trump has actually appointed his personal attorney in his New York trial as the deputy attorney general of the United States. So he is turning the law firm, I mean, the Department of Justice into his law firm. And so it's going to be the Coney 2.0. And it has to be concerning for everyone that people who serve in their personal capacities, professional capacities, defending the president, are now going to be serving that role in the presidency. And on a final note, his last term, he had Jeff Sessions there, and he tried to bully Jeff Sessions, and Sessions tried to face up to him and didn't survive that battle. So clearly, at this point, anyone who's been nominated to that position knows that he's there to protect not the United States of America, but to protect Donald J. Trump.
Nevertheless, Pam Bondi, from what I understand, is not seen as a fire-breathing Trumpist, and there isn't sort of the huge expectation that she's going to go after Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and sort of charge them with crimes.
Well, I have to tell you, the Trump administration has already started imploding before it was sworn in. Usually, I mean, in Trump's last administration, he was firing people left, right, and center. His communications director lasted only 10 days. His AG nominee didn't last a week. So if Pam Bondi goes in expecting some kind of job security and not, pursuing a vendetta against Trump's enemies, then she's going to be very short-lived. Unfortunately, these are the days in which we are in America. We're seeing a Trump gone from a Democrat to a dictator, and it's anyone's guess how that will turn out.
You know these things better than we do, because I mean you're a lawyer there in America. I mean I understand the Department of Justice is such a massive operation with thousands of lawyers that I imagine it would be very hard to totally change the ship in a very quick amount of time.
Well, the thing about Washington, D.C., unfortunately, is that despite the institutions, the time-honored institutions, we're seeing them collapse under pressure because they're being tested by bad actors in ways they never anticipated. For example, a court is supposed to sentence Trump next week. And we're hearing stories that the court is deciding that they may not go through with it because of pressure from the elections. And that's unheard of. That should never be. No one is above the law. And so the Department of Justice, no matter how professional it hopes to be, will buckle under pressure if they have someone whose objective is simply to do the will of the master. And I have to tell you, from my knowledge and experience with the Department of Justice, some of the things they do not comport with what you would expect. For example, the proposed settlement between the Department of Justice and Bagudu, where they want to return Abacha loot to him. It's not acceptable. But again, there are certain, obscure influences that come into play. And you see bizarre things like that happen. If they can do a deal with a known launderer, why wouldn't they do a deal for a president-elect who is a felon? That's the worry.
Indeed. I want to thank you very much, Emmanuel. You're always very good at putting these things in clear perspective so that we understand them better. Emmanuel Ogebe is a US-based international human rights lawyer and pro-democracy advocate, and he was talking to me on the line there from Memphis, Tennessee.